In this section, we will study how to solve percent problems. Percent problems usually ask questions in one of the following forms. You will see either the phrase written as percent of whole is part, or a phrase in the question will read part is percent of whole. I want you to notice that we have the word of in both of these phrases, and the whole always follows the word of. The percent will come before the word of in both of the phrases, and we have the word is in both of the phrases, and we will see that the word part is on the other side of the word is in both of the phrases. So part is by itself on one side of the word is. So this is how you're going to find the pieces to our percent problems using these two phrases. The percent is the rate or proportion of 100. You will see a percent symbol that follows the number, so it will be very clear to us what the percent is in our question. The whole is the total amount, and it follows the word of. The whole, we will use the variable w. Part is the portion of the whole, and will be on the other side of the word is. We will use the variable t when we are missing the part. What percent of 72 is 36? Our statement is, what percent of 72 is 36? So our unknown is our percent, so we'll use the variable p. Of means to multiply, and is our equal sign. We need to solve this equation for our percent in order to answer the question. 72 is attached to our variable by multiplication. The opposite of multiplication is division, so we will divide both sides by 72. And we get p equals 0.5. This is in decimal form, and we must change it to a percent. In order to change a decimal into a percent, we multiply by 100. So we need to multiply by 100%. That moves the decimal point over 2 places, and we get 50%. So 50% of 72 is 36. What percent of 200 is 50? Our statement is, what percent of 200 is 50? We will use the variable p for our percent. Of, we interpret as multiplication. 200 is our equal sign. And now we have this equation, p times 200 equals 50. We have 200 multiplied times p, so we need to undo multiplication by doing the opposite operation, which is division. So we will divide both sides by 200. The 200s divide out, and we're left with p is equal to 50 divided by 200 is equal to 0.25, and that is the decimal form. To change it to a percent, we must multiply by 100%. So our percent is equal to 25%, because when we multiply by 100, our decimal point will move 2 places to the right. 42 is what percent of 168? Our statement is 42 is what percent of 168? We can interpret this as an equation by changing the is to an equal sign. Percent, we'll use the variable p. Of becomes multiplication, and now we have an equation to solve. 42 equals p times 168. In order to solve for p, we need to divide both sides by 168. 168 is multiplied times p, so in order to move it to the other side, we must do the opposite operation, which is division. So we will divide both sides by 168. So we get p is equal to 42 divided by 168. 42 divided by 168 is equal to 0.25. Now, this is the percent as a decimal. In order to change the decimal to a percent, we must multiply by 100%. So we'll multiply 0.25 times 100%, and that'll move the decimal point 2 places to the right, giving us 25%. So 42 is 25% of 168. What percent of 120 is 90? Our statement is percent of 120 is 90. We'll change the percent to the variable p. Of is multiplication. Is our equal sign. Our equation is then p times 120 is equal to 90. We have 120 multiplied times p, so in order to get p by itself, we must do the opposite operation of multiplication, which is division. We will divide both sides by 120. The 120s will divide out, and we'll be left with p is equal to 90 divided by 120. 90 divided by 120 is equal to 0.75. In order to change a decimal to a percent, we must multiply by 100%. When we multiply by 100, the decimal point will move 2 places to the right, giving us 75%.
Let's look at the question. 15% of 60 is what number? I want to interpret this statement into an equation by identifying of and is as operations. Of becomes multiplication, is becomes an equal sign. What number becomes my variable? Anytime I see the phrase what and then a term, an expression, that becomes my variable. 15% of 60 is what number? 15% is 15%, but in an equation I want to write it as a decimal always. So this becomes 0.15. Of becomes multiplication. 60 is 60. Is my equal sign, and what number is my variable, which I'll call x. So I'm saying x is equal to 0.15 times 60. So I do 0.15 times 60, and it gives me 9. So we say that 9 is equal to x, or 15% of 60 is 9.
What is 30% of 90? What is our part, so our part is 30% of 90, our whole. So we're going to use the variable t for part. Is becomes an equal sign. We need to change 30% to a decimal by moving the decimal point over 2 places. Of becomes multiplication. And then our part is equal to 0.3 times 90. 0.3 times 90 is equal to 27. So 27 is 30% of 90.
Let's look at the question. What is 145% of 60? With a problem like this, I need to understand that the word is interpreted as an equal sign. The word of is interpreted as a multiplication sign. So from that I can take this statement to an equation. What is the same thing as saying what number. That will become my variable. So what is 145% of 60? I said what is the same thing as saying what number. That becomes our variable. Is interpreted as an equal sign. I want to use 145%, but I can't use it as a percent. I need to change it to a decimal before I involve it in this problem. So I move my decimal point 2 spaces to the left, and that gives me the number 1.45. Of is interpreted as multiplication, and 60 is 60. So this is really saying, what is 1.45 times 60? And that becomes 87. So we say that 87 is 145% of 60.
What is 3 1/5% of 325? The first thing we need to do is change this percent into a decimal. It is in a mixed number percent form at this point, so we'll change it to a improper fraction percent and then multiply that by 1/100 in order to change it to a decimal. We'll start by changing this mixed number percent into an improper fraction by multiplying the whole number. 3 times 5 is 15, plus the numerator, which gives me 16/5. This is in percent form, so to change a percent to a number, we need to multiply by 1/100. The 16 and the 100 have a common factor of 4, so we will divide the 16 by 4 and get 4, and the 100 by 4 and get 25. Then we will multiply across because there aren't any other factors to divide out. 4 times 1 is 4, and 5 times 25 is 125. Then we'll divide 4 divided by 125 in decimal form is equal to 0.032. So this is the decimal form of this percent. So our question is, what is, so part is 3 1/5% of 325. We'll use t for our variable part. The is becomes an equal sign. We will write this as a decimal form as 0.032, and of becomes multiplication. We will multiply using a calculator, and our answer is 10.4. So 10.4 is 3 1/5% of 325.
Let's look at the question. 60 is 5% of what number? So if I'm going to change this statement into an equation, I want to understand that is interpreted as an equal sign, of is interpreted as a multiplication sign, and the phrase what number refers to my variable. So I'm going to translate it into an equation that I can then solve. So 60 is 5% of what number? So in my equation, 60 is 60. Is, as I said, is interpreted as an equal sign, so I'll make it equals. 5% I want to include, but I can only include it as a decimal, so I need to change it to a decimal form. Move my decimal point 2 spaces to the left. Give me 0.05. Of becomes multiplication. What number is my variable, so I'll call it x. So I'm really looking to solve the equation. 60 equals x times 0.05. If I'm going to solve for x, I need to get rid of 0.05. So I'll divide each side by 0.05. I'll end up with 1200. So we say 60 is 5% of 1200. Let's look at the question. 200% of what number is 90? To solve this, I need to understand that is interpreted as an equal sign, and of is interpreted as a multiplication sign. And the phrase what number refers to my unknown, my variable. So from that, I can build an equation which I can then solve. 200% of what number is 90. So as an equation, I want to use 200%, but I can only use it in its decimal form. So to convert to decimal, I'll move my decimal point 2 spaces to the left. So I have 2. Of is my multiplication sign, so multiplication sign. The phrase what number becomes my variable, I'll call it x. Is becomes an equal sign, and 90 is 90. So I'm really looking to solve the equation 2x is equal to 90. To solve for that, I'll divide each side by 2 to isolate my variable x. The 2 is reduced to 1. 90 can be divided by 2 and left with 45. So we say 200% of 45 is 90. Let's look at the question. 32 is 20% of what number? To solve a question like this, I want to understand that is interpreted as an equal sign, of is interpreted as a multiplication sign, and the phrase what number refers to an unknown or a variable. So from that, I can change my statement into an equation. So 32 is 32, which I'll make. Is becomes my equal sign. 20% I'll use, but I need to make it a decimal before I use it in my equation. So change the decimal form means I move my decimal point 2 spaces to the left to give me 0.2 or 0.20, doesn't matter. Of is interpreted as multiplication. Again, the phrase what number refers to my variable, my unknown, so I'll call it x. So really what I'm solving is 32 is equal to 0.2x. So to solve for x, I can divide each side by 0.2. My 0.2 is reduced to 1. So I'm left with 32 divided by 0.2, which comes out to be 160. So we say 32 is 20% of 160.
Solving percent problems using proportions. We can set up any percent problem in the following manner. The percent over 100 is equal to part over whole. Using this method, you do not need to change the percent to a decimal form. You will put the percent in as it is written in the problem. And if you are looking for the percent, when you solve for percent, you don't need to change it into a percent. It'll already be in percent form. Let's do this problem. What percent of 72 is equal to 36? Our percent is what we don't know. The word of is always before the whole, so our whole is equal to 72, and our part is always on the other side of the word is. So our formula is percent over 100 is equal to part over whole. We don't know our percent. We'll put that over 100. Our part is 36, and our whole is 72. So in order to solve this, we'll cross multiply and get 72p is equal to 3600. To solve for p, we will divide both sides by 72 in order to get p by itself. The 72's will divide out, and we'll be left with p is equal to 3,600 over 72. Using a calculator we get 50%. So in this method we do not have to convert percents to decimals or decimals back to percents. That is one nice thing about using this method. 15% of 60 is what number? In this problem, our percent is given as 15. The whole always follows the word of, so our whole is equal to 60. And our part is on the other side of the word is, and that is our unknown. And we'll use the variable t. We'll use the formula percent over 100 is equal to part over whole. Our percent is 15, and we write it as 15. We do not need to change it into a decimal using this method. Put it over 100. Our part we don't know, so we'll use the variable t, and whole is 60. We will cross multiply 100 times t is 100t, and 15 times 60 is equal to 900. To get t by itself, we see that there's 100 attached by multiplication, so to undo multiplication we will divide by 100 on both sides. The 100s divide out on this side, and we're left with t is equal to 900 divided by 100 is equal to 9. So 15% of 60 is 9. 60 is 5% of what number? In this problem, we see that our percent is equal to 5. Following the word of is our unknown, so our unknown is our whole. So we'll use the variable w. 60 is on the other side of the word is, so that is our part. Percent over 100 is equal to part over whole. Our percent is 5 over 100 is equal to part, which is 60, over whole, which is our unknown. We'll cross multiply. 60 times 100 is 6,000, and we get 5w when we cross multiply. 5 times w. The 5 is multiplied times the w, so to undo multiplication we will divide by 5. And 6,000 divided by 5 is equal to 1,200. The 5's divide out. So 60 is 5% of 1,200.